So, Glyn, thank you very much indeed for joining me on this podcast series. Now, we've known each other for a while, actually, but in many different ways. Our original meeting was through triathlon, but then your name kept popping up in my involvement in the rural economy because you're very much involved in soil farming, carbon capture. It's quite a broad area. Would you like to explain what you do? Because it's actually quite broad, quite deep.
Hi, Tim, and thank you very much for inviting me on this podcast. It's going to be quite fun. I'm really looking forward to it. What do I do? My basic title, I think, is it's really I'm just fascinated by soil health. Soil health is my big thing, but it's one of those how do you commoditize soil health? It's always been one of those, scratch your head scenarios. Farmers need it, obviously, for reasons, and we all want a healthier soil for all the nutrient values and all the other benefits that come. But it's really difficult to commoditize. And so, yeah, that's why I sort of like moved into, other things like composting and carbon farming. It's as means to try and find a way to actually make a living out of, promoting soil health on the island somehow.
And for somebody like me who's interested but not informed, to what extent does soil health have a genuine impact on, for example, food health and food productivity? I imagine it's quite a complex relationship.
It could be, but actually, it's really simple. You are what you eat. We've all been taught that by our grandmothers, and what your food eats is even more important. And it's an area that we haven't really looked at. But to give you an idea, some recent science has come out to say that the nutritional density for food health has actually depreciated by 70%. From what it was pre-industrial agricultural times. So, that's only, pre-war period. So that's how much our food health has actually decreased, which is directly linked to soil health. So, it's something we need to be aware of. And it's probably one of the biggest causes of modern diseases, to be honest. So it's a matter, I think it's absolutely a critical thing everyone needs to be very focused on is maintaining soil health because after all, I think it's, I don't know, 90% of our food is grown in soil. And it seems completely bonkers to be growing our food in unhealthy soil. It just doesn't make sense.
Now, I'm interested in that. Let's unpack that a little bit. If we know that the nutrient value of food has gone down, we're clearly paying for the wrong thing because nobody would pay for something that was getting worse in quality. So is it that the consumer, through the complex chain from supermarket all the way back to farmer, are being paid for by volume rather than quality? Is that the heart of the challenge?
I think you put the hammer on the nail. You really hit it early on in this podcast, which is wow, not many people do. So I think that is our biggest challenge. When you go into a supermarket, you get your packet of apples or whatever, you put it on a scale, and you pay for the weight. You don't pay for a quality. So those apples could be grown substandard. They could be on the ships for months rather than weeks. There could be a whole reasons, numerous reasons why the nutritional value of that produce has decreased over the time, but we don't know. And we've all had strawberries that taste like water. And then we've had strawberries that taste really delicious, but it's potluck. And it's something that has been missing in the supply chain is are we buying quantity or quality? We are definitely buying quantity, and that links into the amount of food waste, because if you were buying for quality, then there would be less food waste, and which would obviously be better for the whole ecosystem. So yeah, absolutely, I think. But the exciting thing is, as in the technology world, there's a lot of work that's been done on this, and using spectrographs and things like that, we're able to now start to measure the nutritional density of food. And I know of supermarkets in I think it's Canada are actually putting one of these spectrometers in front of the tills, So as the food passes the light beam or whatever, it's able to measure the nutrient density, and then a price is actually formulated based on its quality rather than just the quantity.
That's absolutely amazing. And that's new technology that is relatively recent. Are we likely to see that coming into sort of the UK or where we're based in Jersey?
Now, I've actually had it on my phone now for 10 years. So yeah, I'm sort of like yeah, supermarkets don't like me too much at times. You know, when I go around and I use my little spectrometer on the Apple or whatever, which is linked to my mobile phone, and it will give the nutrient value of that produce, and then I will buy it or I won't buy it, depending on what it is, and it's pretty accurate. So this is technology that's been developed by the Israelis, and now the Americans are moving into it. The nutrient biometer, I think it's called. The Americans are doing a lot of work on it. So you can expect in the next 2 years that it's going to change dramatically. But the key is how can we actually bring the farmers online so that they're able to grow quality produce rather than, you know, the old system, which was just growing for quantity. And that's the challenge that we face at the moment.
And I'd like to come back to that in a minute because I'm really interested in the kite marks, the quality assurance marks. I'm familiar, for example, with Red Tractor, but there are many others. And I'd like to understand a little better how that helps effectively with the input process. But just to conclude what you were saying about the app on your phone, anything with the word spectrum says to me something to do with light or sound. So what is it actually measuring? Is it measuring the color of the food? How is it actually assessing nutritional value?
So it's like it's AI. It's so what you're doing is using the spectrograph. You're able to teach the computer basically the quality. So it's color recognition. And it also, what's really interesting is that they've now moved it on to body mass index as well. So you can actually now use the same app to put on your skin, and it will measure your skin color, and it'll tell you what your body mass index is, and how much apples of a certain quality you need to eat or not eat to control your levels of fat and fitness and all the rest of it. So it's technology is moving on a massive level. It's just a matter of scanning enough of the healthy products for the computers to learn what a healthy product looks like, basically, in a nutshell.
And going to that point of departure before you gave that very helpful summary, we were just talking about those standards, those benchmarks, the kite marks, the things that control the inputs. Now, obviously, there are a lot of sort of climate-based inputs, wind, weather, rain, and then there are lots of other inputs that we put onto the soil. Some of them natural, some of them pharmacological, some of them by rotating animals through different pastures or rotating crops. Could you just explain to me how all these different factors affect soil health?
Unfortunately, very little. And that's one of the biggest problems. Soil health is one of the metrics that's not really measured in any of the kite marks. Not even the Soil Association measures soil health, which might astound most people. But really, these kite marks are designed to give credibility to, let's just say, the least inputs to the farmer. So, for example, Soil Association, even though it says no chemical application, there are certain chemicals that can be applied. There's a derogation allowance, you know, for blight and things. So copper can be applied, for example, or ploughing can be done. Now, those are terrible for soil health, but they fit in within that derogation. So kite marks are important. I get it, because they you know, people recognize them, but from a soil health point of view, they're not very helpful.
And yet, if there is a derogation, there must be a perceived purpose or utility to this. Nobody would be spending a lot of money buying things, whether they are nutrients, pharmacized pesticides, to put on their crop, if they didn't feel that they were getting a benefit. So what is the difference between what their intention is, and the outcome that you see?
It all comes down to soil health. So a healthy soil, just like a healthy human, doesn't get sick. And if the soil health has actually depreciated or declined to a state where the plants are actually not as healthy as they can be, nature by design will take them out. In other words, disease will come in and everything else. So unfortunately, soil health has declined so much now. It's well understood. If you listen to, I'm sure you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and listen to the farmers radio, or Radio 4 Farmer Daily, whatever it's called. But it's well understood that soil health in the UK is some of the worst in the world. Biodiversity levels have collapsed. These are significant metrics that we need to be aware of. Now, if you're growing food in such an unhealthy environment, then the plants are going to be sick and the humans are going to be sick. So there have to be derogations put in place. Otherwise, we're not going to grow anything.
So
Light will come in and take it out.
So these derogations are effectively like medicine for an unhealthy soil. So we're saying the soil is fundamentally unhealthy, therefore we put these pesticides, chemicals, fungicides, herbicides, etc. We put these things on the soil to try and make a plant healthy where it might otherwise have been healthy were the soil nutritious. Is that what you're saying? I need to understand this.
It's close. I think a good analogy is the antibiotic. You go to a doctor and you're not prescribed healthy food to make you healthy. You're prescribed an antibiotic, which is like to solve the problem. You see what I mean? So again, it's how we have become so dependent on the chemistry and almost forgotten that biology is what makes the chemistry and the physics work. It's life. It's biodiversity. It's life that makes everything tick in this world. And we've sort of like, we've sidelined probably the most important science to really, promote the other two.
And I like that analogy, and I want to explore that a little further because it's perhaps a simplistic analogy, but it's therefore one I feel relatively comfortable with. We wouldn't necessarily try and cure all illness just by diet alone, but we would recognize that a good quality diet would stave off illness. So it's really about finding the sweet spot. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, so healthy food will prevent disease occurring potentially if it's good, healthy stuff. Whereas antibiotics and things like that just prolong life, if you see what I mean. They don't, we all know that when you put antibiotic means anti-life into a living system, you are naturally going to derogate. Something's going to be, there's going to be a certain amount of derogation happening. And then you have to take probiotics to get the life in your guts back up to a level where you're comfortable again. So you can see it has its use, and this is where we're still learning is what amount of derogation can be applied, sustainably rather than because it's like, I suppose it's like coming off a drug. Not that I've been there, but I assume if you just stop everything completely, the chances of actually successfully detoxing is going to be pretty slim. But if you detox slowly, and then let your natural well-being sort of like develop, you're more likely to detox successfully than if you just drop it with one. So the farmers are exactly the same. They need help, they need support in this system because soil health has been so depleted through the intensification of agriculture that we need to start to redevelop it, start to rebuild it. And there's a cost element to that.
But presumably soil will have its sort of natural context. So in certain circumstances, soil may be a horrid, muddy bog or peatland, or maybe super dry, almost like a desert where the wind will just blow away the whole topsoil. So, nature itself will do things to soil that may be positive or negative. And so are you, in examining soil health, looking at the interventions that make it right for what? For a particular type of crop, for a particular type of location or feedstock? Because what's healthy may mean very different things.
It's a really good question, this, and it's one that's been sort of like argued and discussed through science for for forever. But generally, a healthy soil is not one that's going to get blown away, or it's going to flow away in every single rainstorm or whatever. A healthy soil it can stay intact, and it's there to literally grow things. That's its purpose, grow food. The problem is when that soil loses that health, that's when it gets blown away. The big the sandstorms in America and all the rest of it, well documented, where they lost tons and tons or millions of tons of topsoil. I think there's a a joke amongst us soil geeks going around. What is a nation's biggest agricultural export? I'm not just talking about Jersey here, but all nations. What is their biggest export? Of course, it's topsoil. If you just look at the color of the water going out into the oceans, it's brown. That's topsoil. And it's something, and the only reason that happens is because the soil has lost its health. It's lost its resilience. It's lost its stickiness, and that stickiness can only be given by life. So it's in effect, we call it the snot of the microbes that holds it all together is missing, and so there's nothing there to hold it. So it just gets blown away or washed away. And really, it comes down to the fact that the microorganisms are no longer in the soil, holding it all together, forming this stuff called glomalin, which is really sticky and full of carbon. And so there's no carbon in the soils, whereas soils are what the biggest store of carbon that we have agency over. We can impact that massively, both ways. We can sequester the carbon, or we can lose that carbon.
And I'd like to pick up on the topic of carbon and potentially an understanding of carbon capture. But before we do that, uh, I'm interested in this idea of what constitutes a healthy soil and maybe even context, because I suspect, and those who are much more knowledgeable than me are probably shouting at me for this naive question, but the type of soil in which you would grow cress is going to be a very different type of soil in which you would grow wheat, presumably.
Another fantastic question. And it really comes down to what crop you want to grow. So each crop will have the type of soil it likes to grow in. So, we know, for example, that certain grasses grow on the sand dune, but you try and get a tree to grow on there, it's not going to happen. So, we've got to have a certain amount of life in that soil to support the nutrients that crop requires. So it's a little bit, I suppose, going back to the analogies. When a Chinese man might eat a different type of food to us Westerners, we all have our particular tastes and needs, of culinary needs. Well, it's exactly the same with plants. And in order to actually get that food from a soil's point of view, you need the interaction with microbes. They're like a switch. So they're able to mine all the minerals that plant requires to grow. And a tree would need more minerals than some wheat or some grass. So it would need more microbes present. But if those microbes aren't present, then it's not going to survive. And that goes back to that sand dune analogy, which I just gave.
And as a thought experiment, does that mean that instead of trying to change the soil to suit our crop, we should perhaps reconsider the crops that we grow and harvest to suit the soil? I mean, should we as a planet be changing our diet to suit the soil that we have?
Yes, obviously you get sort of like weather problems kicking in on there. There's certain crops that will grow in certain, climates. And the climates, we can't grow bananas, for example. So that's not going to work for us. So yes, to a certain extent, with climate change, we're already seeing that. So you're seeing in the UK, the vineyards are beginning to produce some amazing wines. The French are really beginning to panic. So that is a positive out of it. But accordingly, um, there are going to be negatives, because we'll be losing that seasonal nutritional benefits that we had. and which it goes into food security issues and everything else. So it's a whole evolving thing. But generally, without getting too complicated, I think it's easier to regenerate the soils than it is to actually grow crops to suit the soils.
And before we move on to sort of things like carbon capture, I mean, how do you regenerate soil?
So first of all, you regenerate soil by not disturbing soil.
Mhm.
And I think that's humans' natural best ability. You know, when you go into, for example, ploughing, that's the easiest way to kill soil. If you take again an analogy of the Avatar movies, you think of all those fungal networks in the soil. Well, that's what our soils should look like. But if you look down a microscope now, you won't see that. You know, all the steel going into the soil has cut and sliced and diced all that living matter in the soil. So it's not there. So the plants are now, or the crops are now totally dependent on synthetic foods because the microbes aren't there to, to provide those nutrients to the crops.
Now that's really interesting as a segue. Uh, I was reading on networks and the very broad context of networks, and the book I recollect was called The World Wide Wood. And it was making the point that roots have a network structure, and in fact, some trees will trade nutrients in summer and winter because one tree will have an abundance and will lend it to another tree and then reclaim that. And this is all done below ground. I believe mushrooms have the same sort of community approach to nutrient sharing and distribution. Um, have I understood that correctly?
Absolutely bang on. Yes, that's exactly how it works. And we've got the same sort of networks within our body. The biggest nerve in our body is called the vagus nerve. You've probably heard of it. And the vagus nerve is totally influenced by our gut microbiome. If our gut microbiome is healthy, then the chances of us being healthier mentally are a lot higher. But with a depleted microbiome, it's not. So absolutely, this communication between organisms is very dependent on the interlinks of life. Life is absolutely essential for the survival of trees. Say one tree gets impacted by disease, through the microorganisms, they can help the other tree resist that by actually moving certain nutrients back into that tree,
Mhm.
to make it healthier to resist the disease and the impacts.
And something we touched on a lot earlier, and I've been kicking it down the road a little bit, was this topic of carbon capture. You mentioned that a lot of carbon, or actually less carbon now, I think you said, less carbon now is held in the soil than it used to be. And clearly, with climate change, and carbon capture is only one component of climate change, but it is an important element. Do you want to explain that for me a little?
Yeah, well, carbon's an interesting one. From a climate change point of view, this will probably fascinate people. Carbon is only responsible for about 25% of global warming. It's
Mhm.
water. That's our biggest threat to global warming. If you think about the impacts that storms have had on us over the winter, and what the amount of moisture that's in the atmosphere has increased massively. And interestingly, that links directly to carbon. So as we get more carbon in the atmosphere, we're getting more moisture, and so you're getting more energy in the atmosphere, which is creating a lot more of these, atmospheric rivers and also energy levels, storms and things that are happening, which are the outcomes of climate change. So the obvious answer to that is let's get more carbon out the atmosphere. Let's get carbon out the atmosphere and put more carbon in the ground, and then we'll get more water in the ground, which is useful. So here's an interesting number for you. Just a 1% increase in soil carbon will hold an additional 225,000 gallons of water. So Jersey pre-industrial levels, agricultural soils, were around 10-15% soil carbon. We're now less than 3.5% according to States of Jersey figures.
And my amateur understanding, and I welcome comments later in the feedback below this, but my amateur understanding is that the largest forest after the Amazon is in Russia, and it's thawing. And this apparently is a significant risk because this is obviously carbon capture in reverse.
Absolutely right. And this is the reality of I think we've moved out of, according to the IPCC, out of climate change into climate burning, or interesting times ahead. But if you think about it on a more local level, and I don't really want to pick on Guernsey here, but where they've actually been burying their food waste for years, because and you go over there and you see the amount of methane that's coming out of those pits right now. There's a continual flame.
Wow.
It's that shows you how much, and it comes down to, how does nature dispose of organic matter? She's got three ways to dispose of organic matter. You've got one, which is compost, biologically aerobic decomposition. Then you've got the anaerobic decomposition. Say the leaf falls off the tree and lands in the water and it rots, but it creates methane as a final result. And the third way of getting rid of organic matter, of course, is fire. Now, it just happens that us humans are really smart people. We've chosen the worst two forms of disposing of organic matter: fire, incineration, or rot, burying it in the ground. And this is, again, what's contributed to massively to the impacts that we're seeing today.
The third of those options was composting, and there will be an awful lot of people, myself included, who compost their own food waste. Are we doing a good thing, a bad thing, and how should we make that better?
I think waste management is probably one of the biggest, easiest win-wins for, to prevent or to mitigate climate change. But again, it's doing it correctly. It's managing waste correctly is one of our biggest problems. Inevitably, when it comes to waste, us humans are like ostriches with their heads in the sand. We don't want to really think about it. It's a bit of an embarrassment. We don't like waste generally, so we just flush the loo or burn it. It's a lot easier than actually managing it. But organic matter is only food for something else. That's all it is. And it's like compost is compost, but just like bread is bread is bread. You get a white bread, which might not be very nutritionally good for you, or you get a sourdough bread, which is a lot better. Well, it's the same with compost. If you manage compost properly, you get, which is probably what you've got at home, a really good sourdough type compost, which is good. It's not smelly, and it's useful, and it produces good food, because it's recycling all those nutrients that previous plants have taken up. But if you manage compost badly, you're going to, in effect, end up with a product which is, might have a bit of use, but it's not as good as it could be. And I think there's that opportunity where we could just improve our management practices.
And is the difference between my compost heap and a pile of food in the ground, digesting and projecting methane into the air, what's the difference there? Is it literally one's microbes who are chomping away on the food and it's them that are producing the methane? Is it the management or the scale? What's the difference between my compost heap and theirs?
It just comes down to oxygen. If oxygen is involved in the organic breakdown, then we call it aerobic biodigestion. So in other words, oxygen is promoting life, which is able to chomp it down and turn it into really useful, healthy soil. But if it's anaerobic, i.e. there's no oxygen there, then there are microbes that are there that can break it down, but the result is methane. So again, if you can just get air into the system, get oxygen into the system the whole time, make sure it never gets smelly. If a compost pile is smelly, then it's been done wrong. If you're getting big wafts coming across, then you know something's wrong. The mixes are wrong, or there's not enough air getting into it. There's a whole lot of reasons why you shouldn't touch that stuff, because if you put it on your land, you're going to be putting the wrong type of microbes onto your soil, which could then sort of like cause problems for the crops.
And we were talking there, of course, about retaining and maintaining the oxygen. Let's go back a little. How do we get the soil to retain carbon?
There's internationally accepted pillars of soil health. So as long as farmers or land managers can manage their land in accordance to nature's rules, to put it simply, then nature, through the process of photosynthesis, will actually take carbon out the atmosphere and stick it in the ground.
Mhm.
So if you think about how did oil actually get there,
Mhm.
it's only through photosynthesis and storage in ground over a long period of time that it became oil. It was only stupid humans that came along and took it out and pumped it into the air again. So nature knows how to do this, and CO2 levels have been a lot higher than they are today. But nature over time has managed to suck all that carbon out the atmosphere, put it in the ground, lock it away safely. And all we've got to do is to emulate that and then not suck it, not lose it back up into the atmosphere, which is always the hardest way. So how do you do that quick term? The easiest is move away from the plow. The plow is the worst thing for losing soil carbon. If you think about it, all that carbon in the air, just let's call it C in the in the soil, all that carbon in the soil, when it's exposed to O2, oxygen, what do you get? CO2.
Mhm.
So you've just got to stop that oxygen getting and combining with that carbon to create, the problems that we're getting together. So move away from the plow. But again, don't blame the farmer. It's not the farmer's fault. It's just the way we have, the plow was brought in for a purpose to after the war, to support the food issues we had and everything else, but it served its course, and the consequences are now beginning to impact us. So we have to support farmers into the next level, which is, you've probably heard of it, Mintil. So we've done all of this in Jersey. This has been done back in 2018. We have a BBC film who filmed me planting potatoes without any ploughing. We can do it. It's just we need new machinery, we need new organic infrastructure, which comes at a cost. And farmers can't be expected to keep on putting their hands in their pockets and dealing with all the carbon, say, that corporates are producing. Corporates are going to have to somehow stop just throwing their bin bags of carbon over the neighbors' fences and expecting farmers to clean it up for them, because there's a cost involved. So, as soon as we can start getting people to take responsibility, the polluters paid side of things, look at their carbon emissions. They have to do this anyway. Reduce as much as possible or avoid emitting, and then pay a farmer to remove the residual carbon. We will then start to reverse this carbon cycle to benefit everyone, and make Jersey a lot more resilient to the impacts of climate change, because we'll get more carbon into the soils.
And you make a really good point in terms of the plants are literally capturing the carbon, putting it into the soil, and 10, 20, 100 million years later, we're pulling it back out as oil. Presumably, biofuels is just a savvy way of short-circuiting that process. And yet there's appears to be a lot more focus on solar, wind, and tidal than biofuels. I mean, what's your view on biofuels?
I actually wrote an article in the JP the other day about the wind farm. I don't know if you read about it, but yeah, biofuels. If crops are grown regeneratively, i.e., in a way that puts more carbon in the ground, the beautiful thing about nature is when a plant photosynthesizes, it only retains a proportion of the carbon to grow in the biomass. The majority is sweated or exuded out through the roots to feed the microbiome, to bring in the nutrients to the plant. So in theory, if you're just extracting that oil within the plants for bio oil, but you're growing the plants regeneratively, you'll be, the bio oil will be part of the biogenic cycle, the natural carbon cycle, and levels won't keep increasing because we'll be storing the majority in the soil. So that would be a lot more effective way of dealing with the problem, the energy crisis, then putting wind turbines up, which all have huge biodiversity consequences. They're basically bird guillotines, and they create a lot of noise and all sorts of other things, which we again, it's a matter of considering all of these things, and it's true cost accounting. Everything needs true cost accounting, and I don't think we are doing that properly. With solar, which requires a lot of heavy metals extracted from somewhere, and wind turbines, which are causing a lot of biodiversity problems. But regeneratively grown biomass for bio-oil, I think, is a pretty good bet.
And in your opinion, why aren't people moving more in that direction?
Why aren't we moving away from antibiotics from doctors into eating healthy food? I think there's certain steps we need to take as a community. I think we're in a unique position here in Jersey to take those steps. I think we've got a great government in place with the rural support strategy that John Vautier has brought in. I think that's world leading. And I think if we are not going to embrace that fully, i.e., sort of like the points-based system you probably know about better than most. But no one else in the world is doing that. But if we can influence the way farmers move into this new regenerative system by using that point-based system, we'll have, and also we've got a fantastic financial community, an auditing community. We could really start to leverage the carbon trading opportunities, if we could just join a few little dots. And I think we're going there. I think I'm really optimistic. I really think we're in a good place in this little island, and it's really exciting to know that next year we've got a couple of farmers coming on board. So we've just got to find a carbon insetter. I don't like calling them offsetter, a corporate insetter, to actually support that farmer through the investment in organic infrastructure in return for the carbon data.
But there have been in the past some scandals, and we've heard the phrase greenwashing. There's certainly circumstances where carbon trading has been used fraudulently. How can you be confident that carbon capture, carbon trading, carbon banking is legal, decent, honest, and effective?
Again, through verification and certification. The beauty about where we could be in Jersey, if let's put it another way. Businesses aren't totally responsible for making business. Government need to be in there somewhere. They have a role to play. To take the airport, for an example, businesses don't invest in an airport. It's governments that invest in an airport to make business happen. And I think we're at that stage now. So we're depending in the next year or so, if we could persuade the government to invest in a decent lab, to actually do the soil measurements that are required, that would be the verify. So, a corporate that says, I want to inset my carbon into a certain field would know that that carbon's been inset into that field because it's been verified through a government lab. You can see where the infrastructure is critical to this. I think the RSS scheme, the Rural Support Scheme, would act as a certifier. In other words, the farmer will only get paid out the money if they have the data has been verified through the lab. And there we would have a carbon trade. All we've got to do is establish what price we're going to be selling the carbon at. That's it. We don't need to go through all these other standards, which are very top-down standards. In other words, they're designed to trade carbon, as you put it, rather than actually pay a farmer.
And presumably, I mean, you wouldn't be advocating this if it didn't have a benefit to the consumer when it comes to nutrient value. But you also make the point that consumers aren't always rational in their choices. So how do we engage, inform, excite the consumer, the person who is buying the produce from the land, about the value of this approach?
Education. So we started this in schools already. There's nothing better than taking a variety of strawberries into the school, one that have very low nutrient density and one that are absolutely just mouth-wateringly fantastic. And then you get the kids to taste them all, but make sure that when they're getting close to the nutrition density one, you eat that one in front of them. There's almost a riot in the room. Everyone knows that everyone wants good, healthy, juicy, sweet fruit, for example. And if you can directly link that to the technology side of things, so people can see it in front of them, by scanning it, something is poor, and why should I spend £5 on a thing of strawberries for another bowl of strawberries, which is £5, but twice the nutrient quality? That means I don't have to eat as many of those to get the same beneficial impact. And so that's going to help a lot on the obesity issues, diabetes issues, and other diseases that are prevalent in society today.
And I'm interested about price, because the assumption might be that if something is better for you, healthier for you, and you're using a new technology or a new approach to growing it, it's going to be significantly more expensive. But at the same time, you've talked about actually less intervention in terms of ploughing, letting nature take its natural course. So that presumably means a whole variety of less interventions. Is it obvious how that's going to affect price?
Yeah, if we unpick that a little bit more, because I think it's a great question. If you think about, if you could, let's just say nature works for free. We don't have to pay all the organisms in the soil and everything else, but fertilizers and chemicals come in at great cost. So if the farmer is reducing the inputs, the synthetic inputs, they're obviously going to be more profitable. If they're more profitable, they should be able to reduce the cost of the food. That's the lovely theory. Reality doesn't work that way. There is the consumer demand will actually push the nutrient demand, the nutrient dense produce higher, because there'll be more demand for it, obviously. There's that's the consumer, the capitalistic way of life, unfortunately. But in all the farms that I've worked on, generally have become a lot more profitable. And when we can get farmers paid the same wages as doctors, I know I've succeeded, because they are our doctors. They should be the pillars of society. They shouldn't be struggling to make a living. And we really need to just help them through this difficult stage, which I think the carbon can do that. Because we'll all benefit. We'll benefit. Our water security, our food security issues will be, I wouldn't say solved, but they, would definitely be addressed. And the big one, Jersey's resilience to the impacts of climate change. If we've got, if the system is if Jersey is a lot more biodiverse, we're going to get a lot more pollinators in place, and we're going to get the prey predator system working. So, the hornets, I know as a beekeeper, are a big issue, but there's no predators in place because we've wiped them out. So, we've got to really start focusing on getting this whole soil food web back up and going, because it's depleted badly at the moment.
Now, one of the things that's interesting in terms of history and where we are with history is that if we take the Industrial Revolution, we saw people leaving their rural villages to go to cities and industrial manufacturing centers, because the technology of the time required us to sort of centralize, intensify, and significant productivity scale. Now we're actually seeing that start to reverse, and you now don't need to work in a factory. You can have a Zoom call and you can work from home. So we're actually seeing almost the Industrial Revolution go in reverse. Are we likely now to see the same effect in farming? Because obviously a lot of the profitability in farming came from things like prairie farm, very large scale farming. Does technology allow us to still be profitable while still being small?
Wow. Good question. My personal opinion on this is that actually technology is not a solution. Technology is only a tool. Technology will never help solve climate change if we're going to totally focus on it. So, for example, if we implement drones and all sorts of other technological wizardry systems, each of those, in the basic form, require, or emit a lot of carbon in their production. Now, are they actually going to improve soil health on their own? They can't, because, again, you've got this what's the word? The communication issues between the biology and the technology and the chemistry and the physics. If we could start to combine everything, so the classic is, my daughter has just qualified from Warwick University as a biologist. And I said, well, did you speak to the chemist or the physicist? And she said, yeah, in the restaurant when they were chatting me up, but they weren't talking. They said, they weren't discussing ideas together. And this is one of the big problems is the sciences are very separated and technology is just another separation. If we could combine everything and start to really utilize our real skill sets, but that's something we know one department doesn't speak to the other. That's what we're told all the time. So I don't know how we're going to get that to work. So, but I think I'm optimistic. Technology is going to be absolutely vital in for the information and drones for getting tractors off the land and things like that. It's going to have its place. It's going to have to, but again, it's got to be responsible. So any of the carbon related to sticking a satellite up into the atmosphere needs to be inset back into the ground before someone could claim it's doing any good. Because if it's not, then it's just another carbon load that we don't need.
And this may be an unfair question to a man whose passion, expertise, and interests are all in soil. But actually, you can grow without soil through things like hydroponics. Is hydroponics a way forward?
I'm afraid not. Just the science behind it doesn't work. So for things like leafy greens, it's fine. It will produce bulk. But if you stick any of those leafy greens under nutrient density meter, they're zero. Because you need at least 17 minerals from the soil for a plant to grow. And there's no way that you're going to get 17 minerals in water. You just don't get a periodic table of elements within water. It just doesn't exist. So the plant can't take up all the essential minerals for us to survive on. So if we tried to live on that, we'd get sick very quickly.
But I understood hydroponics, the whole idea is that these plants can sit in a chemical soup of our making. Or actually describing it as a chemical soup isn't necessarily serving up a great recipe, but do they not, is that not their virtue? The fact that they can literally control the spectrum of light, certain plants grow in different light settings or chemical compositions, etc. That's not the case, no?
Well, it depends on what the goal is. If the goal is to feed us, fine. If the goal is to support a sustainable planet, no way, because you think of the energy that goes into all of those things, and the fact that there's no carbon movement from atmosphere into the ground, and then you think of the nutrient densities, which can't be as healthy as the stuff grown in soil, where you've got a periodic table of elements in there, which we need at least a minimum of 17 from. So if you think of NPK, which is a classic fertilizer, that's only got 3. And that's what our plants are living off at the moment. And that's what we're living off. So, understanding what your plants eat is absolutely essential for a healthy, sustainable life, in my view. So this is why I wouldn't say I'm against hydroponics. I'd just say, don't think you can survive on it.
And I mean, this has been a brilliant, fascinating, informative, particularly for me, podcast for those that are interested in the subject matter. But if you actually wanted to make a change, if you want to be part of the change, if you were either a farmer or a consumer, what action would you recommend that they do for sort of better lands, better food, better life?
Get to know your farmer. When you go to a really good regenerative farm, which is full of biodiversity, full of life, full of animals, and the food tastes a lot healthier, I challenge you, go and eat a regenerative chicken. It won't taste like anything you've ever tasted from a supermarket. It's a completely different bird. We don't have any regeneratively grown chicken in Jersey at all. Everything, 90% of our food is imported, and yet we export 80% or 85%. I don't know what it is. It's madness. But if we actually grew some chicken that, that tell us how they want to live, and we let them live like they want to live, I tell you, the meat is so different. It's so good. And it's the same with crops. If you're a vegetarian, if those crops are grown in the soil they want to grow in, they will taste completely different, and they will provide all the nutrients and the health that we need. But if we grow them the way we want to grow them, not the way they want to grow, then I'm sorry, they're just not going to have the same. It's like me saying, right, Tim, you're going to live in that house and you're going to spend the rest of your life in there because it's convenient to me. You're not going to see fresh air, you're not going to see the sun, you're not going to go for a swim, and you're not definitely not going to go rowing. How would you feel? It wouldn't really fit. But that's what we're doing to plants and to animals, and it's not right. We've got to move away from this idea. You look out in Africa, in all the countries that the UK has actually spread its wings, if you see what I mean, and we've taught the farmers how to to grow all this food the same way as we're growing it. And it's only the indigenous communities that are coming back and saying, well, hang on, that is not the right way. This is how we're doing it. And look at ours, we've sustained life since the beginning of times, by doing it this way. And yet we've transitioned into this commonwealth way of thinking of things is a word I was trying to refer for. We've got to get away from that and start supporting a lot more indigenous mindsets, I think.
So locality and seasonality are clearly important, and therefore anyone who strives to be eating strawberries in January is probably misguided.
I'm going to come back on that a little bit, only because we've also got to keep in mind that we as a human species have evolved, and we're moving on, and we've been. You can't take something good away from people and not get resistance. It's just not going to happen. So by all means, we know how to grow strawberries in this climate. Dyson Farms are doing a great job of it. It's going to be undercover, lots of glass and lots of everything, absolutely fine. But understand what the environmental and the carbon footprint of doing that is, and make sure that is remediated somewhere or mitigated somewhere. And as long as everything's in balance, then that's absolutely, I've got no problem with that. So if you want to drive your Porsche around or fly your aeroplane around, that's absolutely fine, but pay the equivalent amount to make everything better. Like the amount of carbon that goes in the air, you pay a farmer to remove that amount of carbon back into the soil, as long as it's verified and certified. So that will hopefully rebalance things. And this is what I'm trying to do here in Jersey a little bit. We've got a couple of really great companies in Jersey who have actually looked at their books or their everything, and they're trying to get Paris aligned. So they've looked at their total emissions, they're reducing where they can, and they're avoiding where possible, i.e. not getting in their gas guzzling car and getting on their bicycle or whatever, or getting on their bike, not traveling at all, working from home. So they're limiting the amount of CO2, which leaves them with just a residual amount to operate. You're going to produce some carbon just to make some business, and they've agreed an internal price on that carbon. And now what they're going to do is pay a farmer to remove it for them, and that will diversify the farm income. To enable the farmer to actually invest in organic infrastructure. They're going to have to prove that it's done, because everything has to be verified through a local lab if we can persuade Kirsten to invest in one, and then certified by John. And there you've got a circular system which actually benefits everyone, to make a win-win system, I hope.
And so if there is a corporate who is watching this video and as part of their CSR, they want to make a commitment to the island, should they be approaching you or the minister about a lab, or about the methods and mechanics of carbon capture?
Well, first of all, they can look at their their footprint. They can look at their whole business, environmental, their ESGs, for want of a better word, and get on the journey. Get on the journey to net zero. So and there's some great ESG companies in Jersey working very hard on that area. But when they feel like they're at the stage where they've got, I don't know, 100 tons of carbon to remove, that's when they contact us. Because I've got a list of growing farmers who say, we want to get on this, we want to get on this journey. But to us, we want to mitigate risk. What we don't want to do is to sign up with some corporate and find they go bust in 3 years' time. Because I don't want to be investing in a whole lot of organic infrastructure to find that, it goes on finance or something and that comes back to me. There has to be a proper contract in place. But in order to get there, we need all the corporates to look at Paris alignment, basically true Paris. That's scope 1, 2, and 3, and potentially 4, which is a new scope that's come online since COP, which is abatement or avoidance. Sorry. So once all those scope 1, 2, 3, and 4 are in place, then let's start talking.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating, very informative, and enjoyable conversation. Glyn, thank you very much indeed. You mentioned a couple of great resources there, so I'm going to invite you to share with me some links that we can attach to this when we publish it, so that people can get in contact with you or the minister, or indeed anyone who may be involved and can support their interests in moving forwards. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. It's always great catching up with you on these things, and good luck, and hope this podcast system really works well for you, because it's a great idea, and I wish you all the best with it.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's great speakers like you that promote its interests. So thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, and thank you.
Right. And I'll probably cut the recording about there-ish. Well done. How was that? All right.
Yeah, I hope I didn't. And my biggest worry was going down the rabbit hole. I hope I didn't. It's
no, it was good. And what was really good is you weren't so technical that you left me cold, which is really quite handy, because not all of our people are going to be soil experts or farmers. So the fact that you pitched it at a level that I can cope with, I know that you will have pitched it for 99.9% of other people.
Great. Well, what I did, and I think it was only because of your very kind, I think it was email or text that you sent by, or putting those questions up wherever you put them. I think they want to link it in. That made me sit down and actually read through them and try and come up with. So I've done answers to all of those questions. And
yeah, and again, so if you've either got a website, okay, then
we haven't got the website. We haven't got a website yet.
Okay, or a document. Frankly, anything that you want to share. When I produce the podcast, underneath I can write links, references, links to documents or whatever. So anything that you want to share as part of this, when it's eventually top-tailed, edited, etc., I can then include that in with a sort of thing for more information.
Well, so I'll answer those questions that you put out on, and I'll put links into all the relevant information. So the RSS thing, Jersey's alignment to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and all that sort of. Try and keep it as local as possible.
It does take a couple of days. One, because I'm not super quick, but it does take a couple of days to edit. But this will probably be done in a couple of days, so it'll definitely be ready for the new year. So as and when it is, I'll obviously send you a link, and please, by all means, share it, which I'm sure you would anyway.
Oh, it's going to be everywhere. You'll see. Yeah.
Okay, well, have a lovely day, and thank you again very much indeed.
Well, thank you for asking. I really appreciate it, Tim. Take care.
I enjoyed it. It was great. Take care.
All the best.
All right.
Bye.